A Hell's Angel crashes his bike outside a tiny mountain church, and the only person who dares to help him is the town's overweight, lonely virgin. She takes him in when everyone else turns away, never expecting what he'll say next. With blood on his hands and fire in his eyes, he looks at her and declares, "By winter you'll birth me twins." Everyone laughs. Everyone calls her crazy. But when a miracle begins to grow inside her, the whole town turns against them. Now faith will be tested, reputations destroyed, and the past will come roaring back on two wheels. He was born to raise hell. She was born to heal it. But when his old gang returns for vengeance, love might be the only thing that can save them all. Can a man with a sinner's past and a woman the world calls unworthy prove that grace can still perform miracles? Or will this winter bury them and their unborn promise forever? Drop a comment below and share which part of the world you're tuning in from today. If you enjoy stories like this, don't forget to subscribe for more. The misty September morning wrapped the Appalachian foothills in a ghostly shroud as Cade Razor Harlow leaned into another sharp curve. His Harley-Davidson thundered beneath him, the familiar rumble doing nothing to quiet the demons chasing him down this mountain road. 7 years behind bars had changed him, but the Hell's Angels didn't believe in change. They only believed in loyalty, the kind that bound you forever, whether you wanted it or not. Rain began to fall, fat drops that felt like accusations against his leather jacket. Cade's weathered face tightened as he pushed the bike harder, trying to outrun memories of his former brother's threats. Once an angel, always an angel, they'd warned when he'd walked out of prison. But he couldn't go back to that life. Not anymore. The mountain air grew thicker with fog, and Cade's hands tightened on the handlebars. At 38 years old, his body still carried the strength from his years inside, but his spirit felt worn thin, like an old tire ready to blow. The tattoos that covered his arms, visible even through his wet jacket sleeves, told stories he wished he could forget. Without warning, his front tire hit a slick patch of road. The Harley's wheels lost their grip, and the world tilted sideways. Cade felt himself flying, then falling, the bike's chrome and steel screaming against asphalt. Pain exploded through his body as he tumbled, the world spinning in flashes of gray sky and wet pavement. The last thing he saw before everything went dark was a white church steeple piercing the misty sky. Inside that very church, Mary Ellen Brooks was finishing up after choir practice. Her soft footsteps echoed in the empty sanctuary as she moved between the wooden pews, gathering forgotten hymnals. At 33, she'd spent more evenings like this than she could count, finding peace in the quiet moments after everyone else had gone. Home. Thunder rolled outside, and she glanced up at the stained glass windows, now dark with the storm. Her size 20 dress rustled as she moved, a sound that usually made her self-conscious around others. But here, alone with God, she felt no shame. The church had always been her sanctuary, the one place where her weight didn't matter, where the whispers and stares couldn't reach her. The crash outside cut through the peaceful silence like a gunshot. Mary Ellen jumped, her hand flying to her throat. For a moment, she stood frozen, her heart pounding. Then another crack of thunder seemed to shake her into action. Without thinking about the rain or the fact that she'd left her shoes under the choir director's stand, Mary Ellen rushed to the heavy wooden doors. The wet grass was cold under her bare feet as she hurried down the church steps, squinting through the rain. There, at the bottom of the hill, she saw it, a motorcycle on its side, and beside it, a crumpled figure in black leather. Fear gripped her chest, but she pushed through it, running as fast as her body would allow. The mud squished between her toes, and her dress was soaked within seconds. but she didn't slow down. When she reached him, Mary Ellen's breath caught in her throat. The man was big, all muscle and tattoos, his face covered in several days' worth of stubble. Blood trickled from a cut above his eye, mixing with the rain on his face. Despite his intimidating appearance, something in her heart broke at how vulnerable he looked, sprawled there in the mud. "Dear Lord, give me strength," she whispered, then bent down. She grabbed him under the arms and began to pull. He was heavy, so heavy she thought her arms might give out, but she kept going, one step at a time. Her back screamed in protest as she dragged him up the hill toward the church doors. Inside, she managed to help him onto one of the pews, her chest heaving from the effort. Water dripped from both of them onto the worn wooden floor, and Mary Ellen's dress clung to her uncomfortably. Above them, the cross flickered in the storm-darkened sanctuary, casting shifting shadows across the stranger's unconscious face. Mary Ellen sank to her knees beside the pew. "Father," she prayed, her voice trembling, "please help this man. Whatever brought him here, whatever he's running from, let him find shelter in your house." As if in answer, thunder shook the building, and the man's eyes fluttered open. They were the color of storm clouds, and they fixed on Mary Ellen's face with an intensity that made her breath catch. Tears she hadn't realized she'd been crying mixed with the rain on her cheeks as she leaned closer. "You're safe here," she whispered, and something in his face seemed to relax just for a moment before his eyes closed again. Mary Ellen stayed there, kneeling beside him, as the storm raged outside. She didn't know who he was or what dangers might follow him, but in that moment, she knew with absolute certainty that God had brought him to her church for a reason. As lightning illuminated the stained glass windows and thunder rolled across the mountains, she began to pray again, this time for the strength to face whatever was coming. The rain continued to fall outside, washing away the traces of Cade's crash, while inside the old church, two souls, both wounded, both seeking refuge, found themselves at the beginning of a journey neither could have imagined. The cross above continued to flicker, its light a steady reminder that even in the darkest storms, grace could be found in unexpected places. Sunlight filtered through the stained glass windows, casting colorful patterns across Cade's face as consciousness slowly returned. His head throbbed, and every muscle in his body protested as he tried to move. He found himself lying on a narrow cot, warm blankets tucked carefully around him. Someone had cleaned and bandaged his wounds. He could feel the gentle pull of adhesive tape near his temple. "What the—" The curse died on his lips as his eyes fell on an open Bible placed carefully on a wooden chair beside his cot. A pink post-it note marked a page, and despite himself, Cade's eyes were drawn to the highlighted verse, "Therefore, if any man be in Christ, he is a new creature. Old things are passed away. Behold, all things are become new." The words made something twist uncomfortably in his chest. He looked away, taking in his surroundings instead. The cot had been set up in what appeared to be a small office, probably the pastor's study, judging by the books lining the walls and the simple wooden cross hanging above the desk. The door creaked open, and the woman from last night entered, carrying a tray that steam rose from. She was tall, with soft brown hair pulled back in a neat bun, and wore a flowered dress that did little to hide her substantial frame. Her cheeks turned pink when she saw he was awake. "Good morning," she said softly. "I brought you some breakfast, just oatmeal and coffee. I wasn't sure what you'd feel up to after—" She trailed off, gesturing vaguely at his injuries. "Thank you," Cade said, the words feeling rusty in his mouth. When was the last time he'd thanked anyone for anything? For everything. Last night, I mean." Her blush deepened, and she set the tray on the chair after moving the Bible. "It was nothing. Anyone would have done the same." Cade wanted to laugh at that. He'd seen plenty of evidence to the contrary in his life, but something in her earnest expression stopped him. Instead, he carefully pushed himself to sitting position, accepting the mug of coffee she offered. Throughout the morning, he became aware of voices and movement in the main part of the church. Footsteps would approach the office door, followed by whispered conversations. He caught fragments. Dangerous looking. All those tattoos. Mary Ellen alone with him. The woman, Mary Ellen, he now knew, dealt with each interruption gracefully, stepping outside to speak in low tones with the visitors. Each time, he heard the same explanation. "He's just a traveler in need of help. The storm was terrible last night. What kind of Christians would we be if we turned someone away?" By evening, the stream of curious visitors had finally stopped. The rain had returned, drumming steadily on the roof. Mary Ellen brought him soup for dinner, settling into the desk chair with her own bowl. "You don't have to stay," Cade said, watching her blow carefully on a spoonful. "I'm not going to steal the silver or whatever they're all worried about." "They mean well," she replied, though her eyes didn't quite meet his. "They're just not used to visitors." "You mean they're not used to ex-cons with gang tattoos showing up on their doorstep?" He grinned when her eyes widened. "Come on, Sister Mary Ellen. You're not that naive. You must have seen the prison tats." She straightened in her chair. "What I see is someone God brought to our door in need of help. The rest isn't my business." Something about her quiet certainty both irritated and fascinated him. "You really believe that, don't you? All this God stuff? Divine intervention?" He gestured at the Bible still sitting on the chair. "Redemption for sinners?" "Yes," she said simply. "I do." Maybe it was the pain medication she'd given him earlier, or maybe it was something about the way the lamplight softened her features, making her look almost ethereal. But suddenly Cade felt reckless. "Well, if we're talking miracles," he said, his voice taking on a strange tone that was half mocking, half something else entirely. "By winter, you'll birth me twins." The spoon Mary Ellen had been holding clattered against her bowl. Her face went from pink to white in an instant. What?" Cade laughed, but it wasn't entirely humorous. "Maybe God owes me a miracle, don't you think? After everything." But even as he tried to play it off as a joke, something in his eyes, something intense and almost desperate, suggested he meant every word. Mary Ellen stood up quickly, gathering the dishes with trembling hands. "I should let you rest," she said, her voice unsteady. "Good night, Mr. Harlow." After she left, Cade lay back on the cot, staring at the ceiling. He couldn't explain why he'd said that about twins. It had just come out, like something speaking through him. The thought should have disturbed him more than it did. What he didn't know was that Mary Ellen hadn't gone far. She stood just outside the office door, one hand pressed to her chest, trying to calm her racing heart. Through the crack in the door, she could see him on the cot, his strong profile illuminated by the desk lamp. Her heart was torn between fear, of him, of his words, of the strange feeling they'd awakened in her, and an overwhelming compassion that seemed to come from somewhere beyond herself. The rain continued its gentle percussion on the roof, and in its rhythm, Mary Ellen thought she could almost hear a whispered promise of things to come. But for now, she simply watched him drift off to sleep, wondering what God's plan could possibly be for bringing this dangerous, wounded man into her quiet life. The next morning dawned clear and crisp, washing away the remnants of the storm. Cade woke early, his body stiff but healing. Through the office window, he watched Mary Ellen arrive, carrying fresh muffins and coffee. The sight of her quiet dedication stirred something in him, a need to repay kindness with kindness. "Let me help around here," he said when she brought his breakfast. "I'm good with my hands. Used to work construction before." He trailed off, not wanting to mention prison. Mary Ellen hesitated. "You should rest." "I've rested enough." Cade stood carefully, testing his injured leg. "Show me what needs fixing." There was plenty. The old church, beautiful as it was, showed signs of wear everywhere. Cade started with the loose floorboards in the sanctuary, his skilled hands making quick work of the repairs. Mary Ellen watched from the doorway as he moved from task to task, tightening wobbly pews, replacing burnt-out light fixtures, clearing debris from the gutters. By mid-morning, word had spread through the small town. People drove by slowly, some not even pretending they weren't staring. Cade could hear their whispers when they thought he couldn't. "Did you see him? All those tattoos? Poor Mary Ellen, always taking in strays. The fat virgin and the convict, what a pair." The last comment made his jaw clench. He'd noticed how Mary Ellen flinched at their words, though she tried to hide it behind a smile. Around noon, Mary Ellen brought him a sandwich and cold lemonade. They sat together on the church steps, watching clouds drift across the September sky. "You don't have to do all this," she said softly. "Yeah, I do." Cade wiped sweat from his forehead. "Kindness should be repaid." Mary Ellen looked down at her hands. "The gossip will only get worse. Small towns have long memories and longer tongues." "Let them talk." Cade's voice was gruff. "They don't know either of us." A comfortable silence fell between them. Then Mary Ellen spoke, her voice barely above a whisper. "They're right about one thing. I can't." She took a deep breath. "When I was 11, I got really sick. High fever for days. The doctors said it damaged... Well, I can't have children." Cade's hands stilled on his sandwich. The vision that had come to him while unconscious flashed through his mind with startling clarity. Mary Ellen in a church filled with winter light, cradling 2 tiny bundles. He could still see the joy on her face, the tears in her eyes, the way she looked at those babies like they were miracles made flesh. "I saw something," he said slowly, "when I was out after the crash. Thought it was a dream, but..." He shook his head. "It was too real. You were holding twins, right here in this church. Snow was falling outside." Mary Ellen's face went pale. "Please don't," she whispered. "Don't make fun." "I'm not." Cade's voice was intense. "I swear on my life, that's what I saw." She stood abruptly, gathering their lunch things. I have work to do." Cade spent the afternoon on the roof, patching holes and replacing damaged shingles. The physical labor helped clear his mind, but he couldn't shake the memory of that vision. He'd never been one for supernatural stuff. Prison had beaten most of his beliefs out of him, but this felt different. As evening approached, Mary Ellen called him in for dinner. She'd made soup again, and they ate by the light of an old lantern in her office. The tension from earlier had eased, replaced by a companionable quiet. Finally, Cade spoke. "There's something you should know." He set down his spoon. "The men I used to ride with, they're not good people. They kill, they steal, and they want me back." Mary Ellen's hand trembled slightly as she set down her bowl. "Is that why you crashed? Were they chasing you?" "Not yet, but they will be." Cade's voice was heavy. "I'm trying to disappear, start over. But men like that, they don't let go easily." He expected fear in her eyes, expected her to ask him to leave. Instead, she reached across the desk and touched his scarred hand gently. "Everyone deserves a second chance," she said firmly. "Everyone." Cade stared at her hand on his, marveling at how someone who'd faced so much cruelty could still have such faith in redemption. Later that night, after Cade had settled onto his cot, he heard soft footsteps approach. Mary Ellen stood in the doorway, her figure silhouetted by the hallway light. She thought he was asleep as she whispered her prayer. "Dear Lord, protect this wounded soul. Guide him from darkness into your light, and if it be your will, help him find the peace he seeks. Amen." She closed the door quietly, leaving Cade alone with thoughts of visions, redemption, and the strange twist of fate that had brought him to this place, to this woman who believed in second chances. Through the window, stars peeked through dissipating clouds, their light falling softly on the church grounds where, hours earlier, he'd worked to repair what was broken, never guessing that something within himself had begun to heal as well. Word traveled fast in small towns. By Wednesday morning, whispers filled the aisles of Johnson's General Store and echoed across the tables at May's Diner. "Did you hear? Mary Ellen's living with some kind of criminal? That biker fellow with all them tattoos. Right there in the church, can you imagine?" Each rumor grew more outlandish than the last. Some claimed they'd seen Cade sneaking around at night. Others swore they knew about his violent past. The truth twisted and turned until it barely resembled reality. Mary Ellen felt the stares as she walked to the church that morning. Mrs. Peterson, who'd sung in her choir for 5 years, crossed the street to avoid her. 2 deacons' wives huddled on a porch, their whispered conversation stopping abruptly as she passed. Inside the church, Cade worked on fixing a loose floorboard, his tools spread around him. He looked up when Mary Ellen entered, noting her red-rimmed eyes. "You've been crying," he said quietly. "It's nothing." She tried to smile, but her lip trembled. "Just people being people." Before Cade could respond, the heavy church doors swung open. Reverend Samuel Henson strode in, his normally kind face set in stern lines. At 65, he still carried himself with the authority of a much younger man. "Mary Ellen," he said, his voice clipped. "A word, please." She followed him to his office, leaving Cade alone with the echo of their footsteps. "This has gone far enough," Reverend Henson began, closing the door. "I understood offering temporary shelter to someone in need, but harboring a criminal? Living under the same roof as an unmarried man?" "He's not," Mary Ellen started. "I've made calls," the Reverend cut in. "I know about his record. 7 years in prison, Mary Ellen. 7 years! And his association with that motorcycle gang." He shook his head. "He needs to leave. Before Sunday service." "But where will he go?" "That's not our concern." Reverend Henson's voice softened slightly. "I know your heart is in the right place, but you're the face of this church to many people. Think of the example you're setting." Mary Ellen's hands twisted in her lap. "Jesus ate with sinners," she whispered. "Jesus wasn't an unmarried woman living alone with one." The Reverend's tone left no room for argument. "He leaves by Sunday. That's final." When Mary Ellen returned to the sanctuary, she found Cade already packing his few belongings into a worn duffel bag. Her heart sank. "You heard? Walls are thin." He didn't look up. "Don't worry. I'll be gone before I cause you any more trouble." "Cade, please." "It's okay." He zipped the bag closed. "I'm used to it." Outside, thunder rumbled. Dark clouds gathered, promising another storm. Cade glanced up at the ceiling, where water stains marked recent leaks. His eyes traveled to the cross mounted high on the steeple wall, its right arm hanging precariously after years of neglect. "One last thing before I go," he muttered. Despite Mary Ellen's protests, Cade gathered his tools and climbed the narrow stairs to the steeple. Rain began to fall as he worked his way out onto the steep roof, inching toward the damaged cross. The congregation, drawn by the commotion, gathered below. Reverend Henson emerged from his office, face darkening at the sight of Cade balanced precariously above. Lightning split the sky, followed immediately by deafening thunder. Mary Ellen's heart stopped as she saw Cade slip on the wet shingles. "Cade!" The scream tore from her throat. He caught himself at the last second, one hand gripping the cross he'd just secured. For a terrifying moment, he hung suspended between heaven and earth. Lightning flashed again, illuminating his figure against the stormy sky. Then, somehow, he pulled himself back up. The entire congregation held its breath as he made his way carefully back to the steeple window and climbed inside. "Did you see that?" Mrs. Peterson whispered. "The lightning should have struck him dead up there with all that metal." "Maybe the Lord's hand was protecting him," someone else murmured. "Or maybe the devil looks after his own," another voice countered. Mary Ellen ignored them all, rushing to meet Cade as he descended the stairs. He was soaked through, shivering slightly but alive. "You could have died," she said, hands hovering uncertainly near his shoulders. "Cross needed fixing." He gave her a crooked smile. "Couldn't leave that undone." The crowd outside slowly dispersed, but their whispers lingered. Some faces had softened, touched by Cade's dangerous act of service. Others remained hard, suspicious. Reverend Henson watched it all with troubled eyes. He pulled Mary Ellen aside as Cade went to change out of his wet clothes. "This doesn't change anything," he said firmly. "He's still leaving by Sunday." "But you're risking your soul, Mary Ellen, and your reputation." The Reverend's voice grew urgent. "What will people think? What will they say?" "Maybe they'll say I showed Christian charity," she answered quietly. "Maybe they'll say I saw past someone's mistakes to their heart. Or maybe they'll say you've lost your way." He shook his head. "Think carefully about your choices." That night, the storm raged on. Wind howled through the trees and rain pounded against the windows. Mary Ellen sat in her office, unable to sleep, listening to the thunder. Down the hall, Cade lay on his cot, also awake. He'd stayed one more night, telling himself it was to make sure she was safe during the storm. But deep down, he knew there was more to it. He thought about her unwavering kindness, her gentle strength, her complete faith in the possibility of redemption. In all his years of running, fighting, and surviving, he'd never met anyone like her. Her faith moved him in ways no sermon ever had, not with words or threats of damnation, but with simple acts of love. The storm threw shadows on the wall, reminding him of darker times, of men who would come looking for him eventually. Tomorrow he would leave. It was the right thing to do. But tonight, he let himself believe, just for a moment, in the kind of mercy Mary Ellen had shown him. Outside, the wind continued to howl, and the cross he'd fixed stood firm against the storm, its shadow falling across the empty church below. The days stretched like honey in late September sunshine. One week slipped into the next, and Cade found himself settling into an unexpected rhythm in the small town. Each morning, he'd walk to Jim's auto shop, where his skilled hands quickly earned him respect among the other mechanics. The work was honest, the kind that left grease under his fingernails but peace in his heart. "You've got a gift with engines," Jim would say, watching Cade coax life back into seemingly hopeless cases. The older man never asked about Cade's past, and that silence felt like acceptance. Evenings belonged to the church. He'd arrive just as the sun began to set, finding Mary Ellen organizing sheet music or dusting pews. Sometimes she'd be at the old piano, her fingers dancing across the keys as she practiced hymns for Sunday service. She'd always stop when she noticed him, cheeks flushing pink. "You don't have to quit playing," he'd tell her, but she'd just shake her head and smile. They fell into comfortable routines. He'd fix whatever needed fixing. Loose floorboards, squeaky doors, flickering lights. She'd bring him sweet tea and sandwiches, watching him work with quiet appreciation. "You know," he said one evening, wiping sweat from his brow, "you should start charging admission. Your sandwiches are better than any restaurant in town." "Oh, stop," she laughed, but her eyes sparkled at the compliment. He'd taken to calling her Angel, first as a joke, then because he loved how it made her blush and duck her head. It fit her, he thought, not because she was perfect or pristine, but because she had that same gentle way of guiding lost souls home. They shared stories over simple suppers. She told him about growing up in the church, about her dreams of teaching music to children. He shared carefully edited tales from his travels, making her laugh with stories about bizarre roadside attractions and quirky characters he'd met. But some evenings, they just sat in comfortable silence, watching fireflies dance in the gathering dusk. Those quiet moments felt sacred somehow, like prayers without words. The peace shattered on a Tuesday afternoon. Mary Ellen was arranging flowers on the altar when a sharp voice cut through the church's tranquility. "Mary Ellen Brooks, what in heaven's name do you think you're doing?" Margaret Brooks stood in the doorway, her thin frame rigid with disapproval. She was a woman carved from hard angles and bitter disappointments, her mouth permanently set in a disapproving line. "Mama?" Mary Ellen's voice wavered. "I didn't know you were coming." "Clearly not," Margaret snapped, stalking down the aisle. "I had to hear from Beatrice Miller that my daughter is living in sin with some vagrant." "It's not like that, Mama. Cade is just... Cade." Margaret's voice dripped with disdain. "So the trash has a name?" Mary Ellen flinched as if struck. "He's a good man who needed help." "Help?" Margaret laughed harshly. "The only help that man needs is directions to the next town. Have you lost your mind? What would your father say if he were alive to see this?" "Daddy would have shown Christian charity," Mary Ellen whispered. "Don't you dare speak to me about Christian charity. Raised you better than this. But then, you always were soft. Too willing to let people take advantage of you." Margaret's eyes narrowed. "Just look at you. Still carrying all that weight, still hiding in this church instead of finding a proper husband. And now you're harboring criminals?" Unknown to both women, Cade stood in the shadows of the vestibule, having arrived early from work. Each word cut deep, not for himself, he'd heard worse, but for the pain they caused Mary Ellen. He watched her shoulders curve inward, making herself smaller under her mother's assault. "I'm not hiding," Mary Ellen said softly. "And Cade isn't..." "Isn't what? A good Christian man? A suitable match? Wake up, girl. Men like that don't change. They just drag decent people down with them." Margaret grabbed her daughter's arm. "You're coming home with me right now." "No." The word was quiet but firm. Mary Ellen gently pulled free. "This is my home now, my work, my choice." Margaret's face hardened. "Then you're as lost as he is." She turned sharply and stormed out, leaving silence in her wake. Cade waited until he heard the car drive away before stepping into the sanctuary. Mary Ellen stood very still, staring at the flowers she'd been arranging. A single tear rolled down her cheek. Without a word, he walked past her and picked up his toolbox. She watched, confused, as he headed for the front of the church. "What are you doing?" "Your screen door's been catching for weeks," he said simply. "Thought I'd fix it." It was such a small thing, fixing a door. But as he worked, carefully replacing worn hinges and tightening loose screws, He poured into it all the comfort he couldn't express in words. Each steady tap of his hammer said, "I understand." Each smooth swing of the newly repaired door whispered, "You're stronger than she knows." Later that evening, they sat on the porch steps, watching fireflies rise from the grass like stars coming up to meet the night. The air was thick with cricket song and the sweet scent of late summer flowers. "I'm sorry," Cade said finally, breaking the comfortable silence. "For what?" "For bringing trouble to your life. Your mama's right about one thing. People like me usually just cause problems for good people like you." Mary Ellen turned to look at him. Really look at him, for the first time since they'd met. In the soft evening light, his face seemed younger, less guarded. She saw past the tattoos and scars to something deeper, a soul trying to find its way home. "Maybe you're not trouble," she said softly. "Maybe you're the answer to one." Their eyes met in the gathering darkness, and something shifted between them, something warm and real and frightening in its tenderness. The moment stretched like honey in sunlight, sweet and golden and full of possibility. Around them, fireflies continued their dance, and crickets sang their evening prayers. The old church stood quiet behind them, its newly fixed screen, door a testament to the kind of love that speaks through actions rather than words. The night air grew cooler, wrapping around them like a gentle blessing. Neither moved to break the silence that held them, each lost in thoughts of answers and prayers and the mysterious ways God sometimes chose to answer both. The phone booth outside Miller's General Store felt like a cage of glass and steel. Cade's hand trembled as he held the receiver, his knuckles white against the black plastic. "You thought you could just disappear, Razor?" Snake's voice crackled through the line, dripping with malice. "The Iron Wolves don't forget their brothers, or their traitors." "I'm done with that life," Cade said firmly, though his heart hammered in his chest. "Done?" Snake laughed, the sound like gravel in a blender. "We know all about your little church mouse. Sweet thing, always wearing those flowery dresses. Wouldn't want anything to happen to her, would we?" Ice filled Cade's veins. "You stay away from her. Then maybe it's time you remembered where your real loyalties lie." The line went dead. Cade walked back to the church, his mind racing. He couldn't tell Mary Ellen, wouldn't burden her with this darkness. Instead, he threw himself into work, desperate to keep his hands and thoughts occupied. Old Joe Matthews, the church's senior carpenter, took Cade under his wing that afternoon. "Hold the wood like this," he demonstrated, his weathered hands guiding Cade's fingers across the grain. "Let the tool do the work. Forcing it just makes rough edges." Hour after hour, Joe taught him the basics, measuring twice, cutting once, the proper angle for joints, how to sand until the surface felt like silk. Cade absorbed it all, finding peace in the steady rhythm of creation. "You've got good hands for this work," Joe observed, watching Cade smooth down a repaired pew leg. "Steady. Patient." "Never thought anyone would call me patient," Cade admitted with a half smile. "The Lord works in mysterious ways," Joe replied, his eyes twinkling. That evening, Mary Ellen found Cade in the sanctuary, staring at the choir stands. "Would you like to learn some hymns?" she offered shyly. "We're always short on male voices." He started to refuse, but something in her hopeful expression made him pause. "I probably sound like a freight train," he warned. "Let's find out," she said, sitting at the piano. Her fingers touched the keys, and the opening notes of "Amazing Grace" filled the chapel. Cade stood awkwardly beside her, following along as she taught him the words. His voice was rough at first, uncertain, but as they continued, something changed. His deep baritone found its footing, rich and full, wrapping around Mary Ellen's gentle soprano like a warm embrace. When they reached the line about grace teaching hearts to fear, Cade's voice caught slightly, but he pushed through, the words taking on new meaning with each verse. Mary Ellen wiped her eyes when they finished. "That was beautiful," she whispered. "Just needed the right teacher," he said softly. Word spread about the ex-biker who could sing like an angel. When Sunday came, Cade joined the men's choir, standing tall despite the whispers. His voice carried through, "How great thou art," touching something deep in the congregation's collective soul. After the hymns, something compelled him to stand and speak. "I don't deserve to be here," he began, his voice rough with emotion. "Done things I can't take back, things that should have damned me." He paused, looking at his tattooed hands. "But something happened when I crashed outside this church. Someone showed me what grace really means. Not just talking about it, but living it." The sanctuary was silent, every eye fixed on him. "I don't know if I deserve forgiveness, but I want to try, want to be worthy of the second chance I've been given." His eyes found Mary Ellen's in the crowd. "That's all I can offer, trying." After the service, people who'd avoided him for weeks came up to shake his hand. Old ladies who'd clutched their purses when he passed now offered him cookies. Something had shifted, like ice breaking up in spring. That evening, Cade worked late in Joe's workshop, using his newly learned skills for a special project. The wood shavings piled up around his boots as he carved, checking measurements again and again. When Mary Ellen found him, he was putting the finishing touches on 2 small wooden cradles, each one lovingly detailed with tiny crosses and doves. "What are these?" she asked, running her fingers over the smooth wood. "For those twins I prophesied," he said with a grin, trying to keep his tone light despite the way his heart jumped when she touched his work. "Figure they'll need somewhere to sleep when they arrive." Mary Ellen laughed, but her eyes were soft as she studied the cradles. "They're beautiful," she admitted. "Take one," he urged. "Consider it payment for all those singing lessons." Later that night, when she thought everyone was asleep, Mary Ellen carefully placed one of the cradles beside her bed. In the moonlight, the wood seemed to glow with an inner warmth. She couldn't explain why, but having it there made her feel less alone, as if it held not just a prophecy, but a promise. As autumn leaves danced past her window, she found herself humming Amazing Grace, remembering the way Cade's voice had filled the chapel with something that felt very much like hope. The late October morning arrived with a crisp chill that painted the mountains in shades of gold and crimson. Mary Ellen stood in her tiny bathroom, gripping the sink as another wave of dizziness washed over her. She'd been feeling off for weeks now. Random bouts of nausea, strange cravings, and a bone-deep exhaustion she couldn't shake. At first, she'd blamed it on stress. Between the whispers about her and Cade, the tension at church, and her mother's constant disapproval, she had plenty of reasons to feel unwell. But this morning felt different. The room wouldn't stop spinning, and her breakfast sat like lead in her stomach. "Lord," she whispered, "what's happening to me?" The medical clinic was quiet when she arrived. Dr. Sarah Matthews, who'd known Mary Ellen since childhood, noticed immediately how pale she looked. "How long have you been feeling this way?" the doctor asked, scribbling notes. "About 3 weeks," Mary Ellen admitted. "Maybe longer. I thought it would pass." Dr. Matthews' forehead wrinkled as she listened to Mary Ellen's symptoms. She ordered a series of tests, her expression growing more puzzled with each result. "Mary Ellen," she said finally, "I need to run one more test. It might seem unnecessary, given your history, but we need to be thorough." Mary Ellen nodded, not understanding the doctor's careful tone. When the nurse drew blood for the final test, Mary Ellen closed her eyes and prayed, though for what she wasn't sure. The drive home felt surreal. The autumn leaves blurred past her window as her mind raced. She found Cade in the church parking lot, working on his Harley. The sight of him, sleeves rolled up, hands covered in grease, made her heart flutter the way it always did now. He looked up as she approached, his smile fading when he saw her expression. "Angel? What's wrong?" Mary Ellen wrapped her arms around herself, trying to stop trembling. The words seemed stuck in her throat, impossible to voice. Finally, she whispered, "I'm pregnant." The wrench Cade was holding clattered to the pavement. His face went completely blank, then filled with a mix of wonder and disbelief. "But you said—" "I know what I said," she interrupted, her voice shaking. "The doctor wants to see us both, right now." The ride to the clinic was silent, both of them lost in their own thoughts. Dr. Matthews was waiting for them, her face serious as she led them to her office. "I've run the tests 3 times, she began, looking between them. "There's no mistake. Mary Ellen is approximately 8 weeks pregnant." She paused, clicking through images on her computer. "And there's more. We're detecting 2 distinct heartbeats." Cade grabbed Mary Ellen's hand so hard it almost hurt. "Twins," Dr. Matthews confirmed. "Both appear healthy and developing normally, though given your medical history, this pregnancy will be considered high risk." Mary Ellen couldn't speak. She remembered Cade's words from that first night, his half-joking prophecy about twins. How could he have known? News spread through the small town like wildfire. By sunset, Mary Ellen's phone was buzzing constantly with messages, some supportive, many judgmental. Her mother left a voicemail full of tears and accusations. The church secretary committee requested an emergency meeting. Reverend Henson arrived at the church just as the sun was setting, his face stern. "Mary Ellen," he said, finding her in the sanctuary. "We need to talk." She stood straight, drawing strength from somewhere deep inside. Cade moved to stand beside her, but she touched his arm gently. "It's okay," she whispered. "I can handle this." The Reverend's voice was heavy with disappointment. "The committee is deeply concerned. This situation reflects poorly on the church. We've been patient with your unusual living arrangement, but this crosses a line." "Nothing improper happened," Cade interrupted, his voice tight with anger. "We've never—" "Please," Reverend Henson held up his hand. "Spare me the details. The fact remains, this is a scandal our congregation cannot weather. Mary Ellen, I'm sorry, but we'll need your resignation." The words hit her like physical blows, but before she could respond, Cade moved past her. To her amazement, he walked straight to the altar and fell to his knees. "You want to know what really happened?" His voice echoed in the empty sanctuary. "I crashed here for a reason. I saw those babies in a vision before I even knew Mary Ellen's name. I ran from God my whole life, did things that should have damned me forever, but he wouldn't let me go." His shoulders shook. "Maybe he's using me, using us, for something bigger than we understand." Mary Ellen watched as tears rolled down Cade's face, dropping onto his tattooed hands. The sight broke something open inside her, all the fear and doubt washing away in a flood of certainty. "Reverend," she said quietly, "I understand if you need to fire me, but these babies are a miracle. I don't expect you to believe that, but I know it's true." The old preacher looked between them, his expression unreadable. Finally, he sighed heavily. "I'll need to pray on this," he said, and left them alone in the growing darkness. Later that night, as crickets sang outside and moonlight spilled through the church windows, Cade found Mary Ellen in the garden. She was sitting on the old wooden bench, one hand resting gently on her stomach. "Angel," he said softly, kneeling before her. In his hand was something that gleamed dully in the moonlight, a ring fashioned from a broken spark plug, carefully polished and shaped into a circle. "I know it's not much," he said, his voice rough with emotion. "And I know I'm not the man you dreamed of. But I swear before God and all his angels I'll protect you and these babies with everything I am." He took a shaky breath. "Marry me." Mary Ellen stared at the makeshift ring, seeing not its humble origins but the love that had shaped it. Tears spilled down her cheeks as she nodded, unable to speak. Cade slipped the ring onto her finger, then gathered her into his arms. They stayed that way for a long time, holding each other as the stars wheeled overhead and autumn leaves danced around their feet like silent blessings. In the distance, the church bell tolled 9 times, its deep voice carrying across the valley. Mary Ellen closed her eyes, feeling the tiny lives growing inside her, lives that shouldn't have been possible. Beside her, Cade hummed softly, and she recognized the tune. Amazing Grace. The morning of their wedding dawned crisp and clear, with October sunlight streaming through the stained glass windows of the empty church. Mary Ellen stood before the mirror in the choir room, smoothing her simple cream-colored dress over her still flat stomach. She'd chosen it off the rack at the department store yesterday. No time for anything fancy. And besides, elaborate wasn't their style. "You look beautiful," came a gentle voice from the doorway. Reverend Henson stood there, his weathered face soft with emotion. "Are you ready, my dear?" Mary Ellen nodded, grateful for his presence. After much prayer and contemplation, the old preacher had not only agreed to keep her on at the church, but also to perform their ceremony. His acceptance meant everything, especially since her own family had refused to attend. The sanctuary was empty, save for 3 people: the bride, the groom, and their witness. Cade waited at the altar, cleaned up but still undeniably himself in dark jeans and a pressed white shirt that couldn't quite hide his tattoos. When he saw Mary Ellen, his eyes went wide, and she watched him swallow hard. "Dearly beloved," Reverend Henson began, his voice echoing in the empty church, "we are gathered here in the sight of God." Mary Ellen barely heard the words. She was lost in Cade's eyes, seeing there all the love and wonder she'd never thought she'd find. When they exchanged rings, his still that carefully crafted spark plug creation, hers a simple gold band they'd found at a pawn shop. Their hands trembled together. "What God has joined together," Reverend Henson's voice cracked slightly, "let no man put asunder." Their first kiss as husband and wife was gentle, almost shy, but filled with promise. As they signed the marriage certificate, the old preacher wiped his eyes with a handkerchief. "I don't mind telling you," he admitted. "I had my doubts. But seeing you together, well, sometimes God works in ways we least expect." After the ceremony, they drove to the abandoned Miller cottage on the outskirts of town. Cade had been working on it secretly for weeks, determined to give Mary Ellen a proper home. The old place was still rough, broken windows, sagging porch, walls that needed paint, but Mary Ellen saw the potential in it, just as she'd seen the potential in him. "It's not much yet," Cade said apologetically, leading her inside. "But give me time. I'll make it perfect for you and our little ones." Days turned into weeks as autumn deepened toward winter. Cade worked double shifts at the garage, then spent every spare moment on the house. Mary Ellen would bring him dinner, watching as he replaced rotting boards, fixed plumbing, and slowly transformed the abandoned cottage into something beautiful. Sometimes she'd sing while he worked, her voice mixing with the sound of his hammer or saw. The first ultrasound appointment came in, early November. Mary Ellen lay on the examination table, gripping Cade's hand as the technician moved the wand across her belly. The room filled with a rapid whooshing sound. 2 distinct heartbeats, strong and clear. "2 little angels," Cade whispered, just as he'd promised. "Just like I said." His voice was thick with emotion, and when Mary Ellen looked up, she saw tears in his eyes. The first snow came early that year, dusting the hills with white while the last autumn leaves still clung to the trees. Mary Ellen stood at their newly installed kitchen window, watching the flakes fall and feeling utterly, completely happy. The cottage was coming together beautifully. The nursery, though still mostly empty, had fresh paint on the walls and those 2 wooden cradles Cade had carved months ago. But shadows were gathering, though Mary Ellen didn't know it yet. The first sign came when she noticed Cade checking the locks obsessively at night. Then there were the phone calls he'd take outside, returning with tension in his shoulders. He brushed off her concerns with smiles and kisses, but something was wrong. One morning, while hanging laundry on their new clothes line, Mary Ellen found a piece of paper trapped against the porch railing. The message was crude, written in thick black marker. "Time's running out, Razor. Pay what you owe or we collect in blood." Her hands shaking, she went inside to confront her husband. Cade was at the kitchen table, going over bills. "What is this?" She placed the note in front of him. The color drained from his face. "It's nothing, Angel. Just some old business. Don't lie to me." Her voice cracked. "Not now. Not when we're having babies together. What's going on, Cade?" Outside, the snow was falling harder, big flakes swirling in the strengthening wind. Cade stood up, running his hands through his hair in frustration. "The Iron Wolves," he finally admitted. "My old gang. They're saying I took money from them before I went to prison. But I swear to you, Mary Ellen, I didn't." "How long have they been threatening you?" He couldn't meet her eyes. "A few weeks. They showed up in town, started leaving messages. I thought I could handle it quietly, protect you from—" "Protect me?" The tears came then, hot and angry. "By lying to me? By keeping secrets? I thought we were past that, Cade. I thought you trusted me." "I do trust you." He reached for her, but she stepped back. "I love you. I couldn't bear to see you worried, not in your condition." "My condition doesn't make me helpless," she said quietly. "And love without honesty isn't really love at all." The silence stretched between them, filled only with the soft hiss of falling snow against the windows. Mary Ellen placed one hand protectively over her stomach, feeling the slight swell there that held their miracle babies. "Tell me everything," she finally said. "No more secrets." The wind howled outside as Cade began to speak, confessing everything he'd been trying to protect her from. The snow fell thicker and thicker, blanketing their little cottage in white, as the truth finally came out in the warm kitchen they'd built together. Cade sank heavily into a kitchen chair, his shoulders slumped with the weight of secrets too long carried. The wind rattled the windows of their cottage as Mary Ellen stood waiting, one hand still protectively curved over her growing belly. "I never told you about my brother Tommy," he began, his voice rough. "He was the good one. Smart kid, college scholarship, whole life ahead of him, but I dragged him down with me with all my mistakes." Mary Ellen pulled out a chair and sat across from him, reaching for his hand. He gripped it like a lifeline. "7 years ago, I wanted out of the Iron Wolves. They don't just let people walk away. You have to buy your freedom. $25,000 they wanted." Cade's jaw clenched. "I didn't have that kind of money, so I got desperate. Started skimming from their drug runs, little by little. Tommy found out what I was doing and tried to help me." Tears filled his eyes. "One night, we were supposed to make the exchange. Tommy was keeping watch while I grabbed the money from their stash house. But someone tipped them off. They caught Tommy first. Mary Ellen squeezed his hand tighter as his voice broke. They beat him to death right there in the street, made me watch, said it was my punishment for trying to steal from them. Cade's free hand curled into a fist. I went crazy, started fighting back. That's how I ended up in prison, assault charges. The money disappeared that night. The wolves think I still have it hidden somewhere. But you don't, Mary Ellen said softly. It wasn't a question. No, I never even got to touch it, but they won't believe that. He looked at her with anguish in his eyes. Now they're here, and they're not going to stop until they get what they think I owe them, with interest. Thunder rolled in the distance as the storm intensified. Mary Ellen could barely see the yard through the thickening snow. We'll go to the police, she suggested, but Cade was already shaking his head. The wolves have cops on their payroll, and even if they didn't, I'm an ex-con on parole. Who would believe me? He stood up suddenly, pacing the kitchen. I thought I could outrun them, thought God was giving me a second chance with you and the babies, but I was fooling myself. Don't say that, Mary Ellen pleaded. God did give you a second chance. He brought you to me for a reason. Maybe the reason was to warn you. Cade stopped pacing, looking at her with determination. I have to leave, Angel. It's the only way to keep you safe. No. She struggled to her feet. We're married. We're having babies. You can't just... They killed my brother! Cade's voice cracked like a whip. They'll kill you too, and our children. I won't let that happen. Not again. Mary Ellen moved to block the door. God can protect us. We just have to have faith. Faith won't stop bullets, he said bitterly. I've seen what these men can do. The only way to save you is to lead them away from here. By turning yourself in, they'll kill you. Better me than you and the twins. He gently moved her aside and went to their bedroom. Mary Ellen followed, watching helplessly as he stuffed some clothes into a backpack. Please, she begged. We can figure this out together. The whole town will help us now. They've seen how you've changed. Cade paused in his packing, turning to cup her face in his hands. You did that. You saw good in me when no one else would. You made me believe in miracles again. He kissed her forehead softly. That's why I have to protect you no matter what. Don't go, she whispered, but she could see in his eyes that his mind was made up. The storm raged as night fell. Mary Ellen sat at the kitchen table, watching through tears as Cade made final preparations. He kept glancing at her stomach, as if trying to memorize the sight of where his children grew. Just before midnight, he pulled on his heavy boots and riding jacket. The wind howled outside as he stood by the door, hesitating. Then, with deliberate movements, he removed his wedding band and placed it on the kitchen table. I love you, he said simply. Tell our babies about me someday. Tell them their daddy tried to do right in the end. Mary Ellen couldn't speak through her sobs. She reached for him, but he was already opening the door. Snow swirled in, coating the floor with white as Cade stepped out into the storm. The roar of his motorcycle starting up was barely audible over the wind. Then he was gone. Mary Ellen's legs gave out. She collapsed to the kitchen floor, her arms wrapped around her middle as if she could shield her unborn children from the pain tearing through her heart. Through her tears, she began to pray. Please, God, she whispered into the empty house, keep him safe. Bring him back to us. Please. She prayed through the endless night as the storm raged on. Sometimes she dozed fitfully, only to jerk awake calling Cade's name. As dawn approached, she finally dragged herself to their bed, though she couldn't bear to lie on his side. The morning light was gray and dim when Mary Ellen forced herself to get up. Her body felt heavy with grief as she made her way to the church for morning prayers. She needed the comfort of the sanctuary, needed to feel closer to God. But when she opened the church doors, she stopped short. There, draped carefully over the altar beneath the cross, was Cade's worn leather jacket, the one he'd been wearing the night of his crash, the night that brought him into her life. She approached slowly, her fingers trembling as she touched the familiar leather. It was still warm from his body. He must have come here just before leaving town, leaving this final piece of himself behind like a silent goodbye. Mary Ellen sank to her knees before the altar, clutching his jacket to her chest. It smelled like him, motor oil and leather and the soap she'd bought him. Her tears fell faster as she breathed in his scent, wondering if she'd ever smell it again. "Keep him safe," she prayed once more, her voice echoing in the empty church. "Please, Lord, keep him safe and bring him home." Outside, the snow continued to fall, covering all traces of motorcycle tracks, as if Cade had never been there at all. The days after Cade's departure melted together like the falling snow. Mary Ellen moved through them in a fog of grief, her growing belly the only reminder that time was still moving forward. Her fingers trembled on the piano keys during choir practice, and sometimes she had to stop playing when the memories became too much. The whispers followed her everywhere. "Poor thing," they'd say, "left alone with those babies." But not everyone turned away. Reverend Henson, his own heart softened by her unwavering faith, became her strongest defender. "God works in mysterious ways," he told the congregation one Sunday, "and sometimes his greatest miracles come through our deepest trials." As December deepened, the kindness of some townsfolk shone through like stars in the dark. Mrs. Peterson from the bakery brought fresh bread every morning. Old Mr. Thompson and his sons stacked firewood by her door without being asked. Even some who had judged her harshest began leaving casseroles on her porch. Christmas Eve arrived with bitter winds and heavy snow. Mary Ellen sat at the church piano, her fingers moving across the keys as the congregation gathered for midnight service. Her back ached, but she played on, the familiar carols bringing both comfort and pain. Tears rolled down her cheeks as she remembered how Cade used to stand near the piano, his deep voice joining the hymns. The storm grew fiercer as the service progressed. Snow piled against the windows until Reverend Henson announced they'd all have to stay put until it passed. The church became a shelter, with families huddling in pews, sharing blankets and thermoses of coffee. As Mary Ellen played Silent Night, a sharp pain gripped her middle. She gasped, her hands faltering on the keys. Another contraction followed, stronger than the first. Thunder boomed outside, eerily similar to that September night when she'd found Cade bleeding in the rain. Mrs. Peterson rushed to her side as she doubled over. "The babies are coming," Mary Ellen whispered, gripping the piano bench. Through the howling wind and rumbling thunder, she thought she heard something else, the distant growl of a motorcycle engine. Her heart leaped, then fell. She'd imagined that sound so many times in the past weeks, always turning to find empty air where she hoped Cade would be. The congregation sprang into action. Women gathered clean linens from the church closets, while men pushed pews aside to make space. More thunder crashed overhead as another contraction seized her, and Mary Ellen closed her eyes, praying for strength. The contractions grew stronger, making Mary Ellen cry out in pain. Mrs. Peterson and two other women helped her lie down on a makeshift bed of choir robes and blankets near the altar. The storm raged outside, rattling the stained glass windows with each thunderous blast. "Someone needs to get through to Dr. Matthews," Reverend Henson called out, his voice tight with worry. Suddenly, the heavy wooden doors of the church burst open with a thunderous crack. Snow and wind whirled in, along with a familiar silhouette. There stood Cade, his leather jacket torn and frozen, his face bruised and bleeding. His eyes found Mary Ellen immediately. "Angel," he whispered, staggering forward. Blood dripped from a gash above his eye, and his hands were raw and scraped. He looked like he'd been through hell and back. The congregation gasped as he stumbled down the aisle, leaving spots of red in the snow melting from his boots. "The Iron Wolves," he managed to say, dropping to his knees beside Mary Ellen. "They're done. Turned them all in. Had to make it right." Then his eyes rolled back, and he collapsed beside her. Mary Ellen screamed, both from a contraction and from seeing Cade fall unconscious. Through her pain, she reached for his hand. Dr. Matthews arrived just then, bursting through the doors with his medical bag. "Made it through the storm," he panted, quickly assessing the situation. The next hour passed in a blur of pain and prayer. The congregation formed a circle around them, their voices raised in hymns that mixed with Mary Ellen's cries. As the first baby crowned, Cade stirred, his eyes fluttering open. "Push," Dr. Matthews urged, and Mary Ellen bore down with all her strength. The first baby's cry pierced the air just as thunder cracked overhead. Minutes later, his brother followed. 2 perfect baby boys, born on Christmas Eve, just as Cade had prophesied months ago. When both babies were cleaned and swaddled, Mary Ellen placed one in Cade's trembling arms. His face was wet with tears as he cradled his son. "You came home," Mary Ellen whispered, holding their other baby close. Cade couldn't hold back his sobs. "Thank you, God," he prayed aloud, his voice breaking. "Thank you for one more chance." The congregation, many of whom had once judged them so harshly, knelt around the family. Their prayers filled the church, mixing with the baby's soft cries and the dying storm outside. In that moment, none could deny the miracle they witnessed, a family forged by faith, sealed by love, and blessed by grace. The January morning dawned crisp and bright, sunlight dancing off fresh snow that blanketed the Appalachian foothills. Inside their small cottage, warmth radiated from the stone fireplace where Cade and Mary Ellen sat in matching rocking chairs, each cradling one of their sleeping twins. Cade's bruises had finally faded, though a thin scar above his eyebrow remained, a reminder of the night he'd returned to them through the blizzard. His sleeves were rolled up, revealing the transformation of his arms. Where motorcycle gang tattoos once marked his skin, carefully chosen Bible verses now wrapped around his forearms in elegant script. The most prominent read, "Amazing Grace," a tribute to his daughter's name and his own journey to redemption. "They're growing so fast," Mary Ellen whispered, running her finger along baby Grace's cheek. The infant stirred but didn't wake, her tiny hand clutching her mother's sweater. "Strong, just like their mama," Cade replied, adjusting Gideon in his arms. The boy was the spitting image of his father, with a shock of dark hair and fierce determination even in sleep. Throughout the week, a steady stream of visitors came bearing gifts, hand-knitted blankets, homemade casseroles, and tiny clothes. The same townspeople who had once whispered cruel gossip now cooed over the babies, their hearts softened by the undeniable miracle of the twins' birth. At the New Year's service, the church overflowed with witnesses as Reverend Henson performed the baptism. His hands trembled slightly as he held each baby, his eyes misty with emotion. "I baptize you, Grace," he proclaimed, touching water to the girl's forehead. "And you, Gideon," doing the same to her brother. The names rang out clear and true, echoing off the chapel walls as the congregation beamed. As the church bells pealed in celebration, Cade pulled Mary Ellen close. "By winter, you birthed me twins," he whispered in her ear, his voice thick with emotion. and a reason to live. She smiled up at him, resting her head against his shoulder as happy tears slipped down her cheeks. Later, they stood together in the gently falling snow outside the church, a family forged by faith and sealed by love. Cade's motorcycle sat nearby, its chrome gleaming in the winter light. But it was no longer a symbol of escape or his troubled past. Instead, it stood as a testament to the winding road that had led him home, to love, to family, and to grace. Thank you for listening. Stories connect us in the most unexpected ways. If you felt that spark today, make sure you're subscribed. I share a new one daily, and the next might change your day.